Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are unpacking a truly massive transaction, one that has absolutely everyone talking about the future of Canadian payment data, technology, and, honestly, national security. We're looking at the sale of Moneris, which is, without a doubt, one of Canada's most critical financial engines. So let's dive right into this, because I promise you, there is so much more to this story than just a simple change in corporate ownership.
2 billion Canadian dollars. That is the announced purchase price, which is roughly 1.44 billion US dollars for the sale of Moneris to the US-based private equity firm Francisco Partners. Now look, private equity acquisitions happen every single day, right? But this specific $2 billion deal has sent absolute shockwaves through the financial and tech sectors. Why? Because of what Moneris actually represents to the everyday financial life of literally millions of people.
You have to remember, Moneris isn't just some flashy new fintech startup that popped up overnight. It was established way back around the year 2000 as a joint venture between two of Canada's biggest financial heavyweights, RBC and BMO. For more than a quarter of a century, this company has remained tightly tethered to Canadian banking ownership. So today's transaction, it literally represents the end of an era. Two Canadian bank owners are stepping away, and they're handing the reins to a single U.S. private equity buyer.
And it's that sudden, massive shift that brings us to the sensational headline question you've probably seen triggered all across the country: is Canadian payment data at risk? Look, when a major payments platform leaves domestic bank ownership, people naturally panic about their privacy. It makes sense. But to truly grasp the stakes here, we really have to peel back the layers of this story and understand what exactly is being sold. Which brings us to our first core concept to explore today: Canada's invisible infrastructure. When most of us tap our card for a morning coffee, what do we think about? We think about Visa, MasterCard, our bank, maybe Apple Pay on our phone. We rarely, if ever, think about the actual processor sitting right there in the middle. But get this, Moneris processes approximately 1 in 3 of all transactions nationwide. Just think about how many donuts and coffees that represents on a Tuesday morning alone. It's not just a third of banks using them, it's a huge, massive slice of all payment activity flowing through one single company. And all that invisible activity supports over 325,000 points of commerce. We're talking local restaurants, neighborhood retail shops, massive online businesses. They all rely completely on this invisible infrastructure just to stay operational. When the system works, nobody notices. But when it fails, suddenly everyone notices. Because if a company processes that much payment activity, its technology, its resilience, and its cybersecurity matter far, far beyond just its shareholders. They matter to the entire Canadian economy. Okay, so this leads us directly into busting what we can call the privacy panic and really separating the myth from the reality here. The immediate, knee-jerk emotional assumption is that a U.S. buyout means unlimited foreign access to Canadian financial data practically overnight. But honestly, that view is just way too simplistic. A change in ownership does not magically mean the new owner suddenly gets a master key to all your financial information. Actually, scratch that, it's not even close. Moneris still operates under existing contracts, incredibly strict privacy laws, and deeply established data handling policies. The real privacy risk isn't determined simply by looking at the passport of the new buyer. It's determined by very pragmatic, nitty-gritty operational details. For example, where exactly is the data being processed? Which third parties are actually given access to it? What foreign laws could potentially interact with the business now? And how does the company respond to legal requests for information? Those are the questions that matter far more than just the nationality of the private equity firm. Now, let's look at the core issue of this entire $2 billion deal: the absolute critical distinction between data protection and digital sovereignty. To really understand why this matters, we first have to define digital sovereignty. Simply put, it's the degree of control a country has over its strategic digital infrastructure. Canada, like everyone else, increasingly depends on digital infrastructure that crosses borders, things like cloud computing, AI, and of course payment systems. The fundamental policy tension here is super simple. Should a country control its own essential financial pipes? Because here's the thing. A country can have incredibly strong data protection, strict rules for exactly how information can be handled, and still completely lack digital sovereignty if it depends heavily on foreign-owned technology. Think of it like this. Data protection is about the rules of the game. Digital sovereignty asks the much bigger question of who actually owns the stadium. Once strategic infrastructure is controlled by a foreign owner, domestic policymakers inherently just have less direct influence over it.
So let's explore what this means moving forward as we weigh the bull versus the bear cases for this acquisition. The bull case argues that Francisco Partners, being a U.S.-based firm that is heavily focused on technology, is going to bring a massive injection of new capital. Their model is generally to acquire, improve, and grow. This could lead to much stronger international expertise and better cybersecurity. Ultimately, a company can completely change ownership and still employ Canadians and operate firmly under Canadian law. Conversely, though, the bear case warns that ownership inevitably changes strategic priorities. A new foreign owner might alter investment decisions, they might swap out technology suppliers, or even completely shift the data architecture. The core risk here is the potential loss of Canada's long-term role and domestic influence over its very own payment ecosystem. But hey, it is absolutely vital to remember that a transaction of this scale isn't finalized just because a PR announcement went out and an agreement was signed. There is a regulatory safety net in place. Approval is not automatic. Canadian regulators can still formally review the entire deal for competition, financial stability, and national interest issues. Honestly, the most important thing to watch right now isn't the social media commentary, it's what conditions, if any, regulators decide to impose before allowing this deal to actually close.
Now, I know you're probably wondering, how does this actually impact you? Well, for everyday consumers, tomorrow is likely going to look exactly like today. You'll tap your card, the terminal will beep, and you probably won't notice a single thing. But for those 325,000 plus merchants, it's a very different story. Private equity owners generally want the businesses they buy to grow in value, which means merchants could eventually see changes in pricing, new merchant contracts, updated fraud tools, or even shifts in customer service. They have incredibly legitimate business reasons to be watching this acquisition like a hawk.
So, to summarize this incredibly complex landscape, the source highlights 5 crucial things we all need to be watching closely. 1. Does regulatory approval come with any major conditions? 2. Will data governance and privacy policies fundamentally shift? 3. Does the new buyer actually follow through and increase technology and cybersecurity investment? 4. Do merchant pricing and contracts change down the line? And 5. Does Canada maintain sufficient control over this strategically vital piece of its financial system?
At the end of the day, this entire debate really boils down to a profound tension. Global capital makes companies more efficient and brings in new tech, but national security concerns make governments want strategic control over their own backyard. The sale of Moneris doesn't prove that Canadian data is instantly vulnerable, but it definitely places Canada squarely in the middle of a massive global debate. Payments are no longer just about moving money. They are about technology, resilience, and sovereignty. So I'll leave you with this final question to consider. As the digital economy rapidly expands, who should truly control the invisible infrastructure that you depend on every single day?